My name is Kearney and I'm the Director of Development for Autism NI. Autism NI is Northern Ireland's main autism charity, and we exist to support autistic people and their families and campaign to raise autism acceptance in society. All of the information about our charity and the support that we provide is available in the link description. Autism NI have joined with the Southern GP Federation to produce a series of 2 videos on autism, anxiety and self-care. So the first video is going to be about why autistic people experience more anxiety on a day-to-day basis. And the second video will be more focused on how we can manage anxiety and promote self-care and well-being. So research shows us that autistic people are more likely to experience anxiety on a day-to-day basis than neurotypical people. And there are lots of reasons for this, and also lots of ways that you can support your own well-being and reduce and manage your anxiety. Autism is a spectrum condition that impacts how a person communicates, interacts with other people, and how they experience the wider environment in relation to their routines and their sensory processing. As you can see in the image here, autism is a spectrum condition, and what we mean by that is that it's different for everybody. So once you know one person on the spectrum, you know that one person. And each individual will have areas of strength and areas of skill, and then areas that they might need more support in. Autism is not the wrong way of processing or thinking, it's just a different neurotype that comes with its strengths and challenges. So let's think about those 4 areas of difference for an autistic person. We're going to talk about communication, interaction, routines, and sensory processing. So firstly, thinking about communication, autistic people are more likely to be very visual thinkers and very literal, concrete thinkers. So that means that if you're in a communication situation where somebody is using lots of language, speaking really fast, or using a lot of abstract language, that can cause you to feel more overloaded and stressed or anxious when you're communicating. And that can really impact on your confidence and your anxiety. So for example, if somebody says to you, we'll maybe talk a little bit about that later, what does that actually mean? When is later? Maybe. How often are we going to do it? Or when is it going to happen? And how long will we speak? And those sorts of communication difficulties can really cause a lot of anxiety for autistic people. And in terms of interaction, autistic people are more likely to have a different way of interacting than some neurotypical people. And this is sometimes called the double empathy problem. So the double empathy problem is really recognizing that when 2 people with very different styles of interaction or very different operating systems interact with each other, you're more likely to experience misunderstandings or miscommunication. So for example, if an autistic person is very straight to the point, honest and very detail focused, that might be the best way for them to communicate and interact. It makes most sense for them. But for a neurotypical person in that environment, they might have much more of a focus on eye contact and small talk because it makes them feel comfortable. Neither person is doing it wrong, it's just different. And because of that difference, you might get misunderstandings or assumptions about what the other person's intent is. And you might have experienced this before. If you have ever felt that you might come across as blunt or as rude, when actually you're just getting straight to the point, or somebody has said to you that they didn't think you were listening or paying attention, when actually you were overloaded and just really trying to cope. Those sorts of misunderstandings can cause a lot of anxiety for an autistic person in regards to interacting with other people. And for some people, they might try to mask or hide some of these differences. And that in itself can cause a lot of anxiety, exhaustion and burnout. So it isn't a great long-term strategy for a lot of autistic people to use. A strategy that can be helpful is really understanding more about how you process, how you interact and how you communicate most effectively, and trying to communicate that with other people so that you can get information in the way that works for you. So for example, it might be asking if somebody follows up with you via email or text after a conversation so that you have it written down. It might be having information ahead of time about a particular social event or something that's happening in the future, asking somebody to send you that information ahead of time so that you can get prepared and work in the way that works best for your brain. That can help you to alleviate that anxiety and engage in the way that works best for you. The last thing I want to talk about in terms of interaction is something called alexithymia. So alexithymia is a difficulty in understanding or expressing your own emotions or other people's emotions. And some people can really misunderstand this as a lack of empathy for autistic people. And autistic people have lots of empathy, they have lots of connections with other people. And actually some autistic people can really be hypersensitive to other people's emotions. But alexithymia may mean that actually you struggle sometimes to recognize when you're starting to get anxious. So if you're not able to, or if you struggle to really pick up on those first signs of anxiety or stress, it means that actually you're more likely to get more and more stressed and only recognize or realize that when you're already at a very high level of stress and anxiety, which is much harder to manage. So if this feels familiar to you, one of the things that you can do is think about actually what does anxiety look like and feel like for you. So you could use something like this body outline to think about when you're feeling anxious, stressed, sad, or any of those emotions. What does it look like for you? What do you say? What do you feel like inside? And what do you look like on the outside? And helping you to recognize those emotions, helping you to recognize what that looks like for you is the first step in helping you to regulate some of those emotions. So next up, what I want to talk about is routines. So a lot of autistic people tend to be very routine bound, tend to have a preference for routines and really struggle sometimes with unexpected change. And one of the reasons for this is that autistic people tend to be monotropic thinkers. And what monotropism is really this focus on detail. So for a lot of autistic people, they tend to have a great level of skill in being deep focused and that attention to detail. They focus in on a small number of different activities or tasks in an environment and devote all of their attention to that. And that can be a phenomenal skill. So you can have a real deep focus, you can have that attention to detail that a lot of other neurotypical people may not have. The disadvantage to this monotropism is that actually sometimes it can be harder for you to then see that bigger picture or recognize those changes or adaptations in an environment, which means that switching from one task to another can be more challenging. And it can also mean that going outside of your day-to-day routine can be more challenging because you're not as able to pick up or understand those subtle cues in an environment that help you to understand what to do next. And that can cause a lot of anxiety, especially in unfamiliar environments. So having familiarity, having warning in advance when things are changing can be really helpful to help you to manage and mitigate and reduce that anxiety on a day-to-day basis. Monotropism and that processing can also impact on your executive functioning skills. So for some autistic people, they may have difficulties in some of those executive functioning skills. Things like planning, organising for your day, and multitasking. If that sounds familiar to you and you do struggle sometimes in your executive functioning, there are lots and lots of different ways that you can implement in your day-to-day life to try to help you to manage some of those executive functioning skills. So for example, if you have a GP appointment, you might think, okay, well, I'll put that in my diary, I'll put that in my phone and I'll set a reminder. And that can be a really good starting point. But actually, in addition to that, scheduling in your traveling time and then putting a reminder in for when you're meant to leave the house can be even more effective in helping you to plan and organise and not get overloaded or stressed for getting to that appointment. The next area I want to talk about is sensory processing. So with sensory processing, this is really linked to anxiety and stress, because actually when you are experiencing sensory information, your brain is processing that to enable you to understand whether you're safe in an environment or not. And if somebody gets too much or too little sensory information, it can tell your brain that you're potentially in danger, and that really instigates that fight or flight adrenaline response. And that's why if you've ever experienced sensory overload, you might have experienced that adrenaline fight or flight response, because those are really interlinked in your brain. So for autistic people, You might be oversensitive or undersensitive to any of the 8 senses shown in the picture here. So it can be sight, sound, taste, smell, touch. Proprioception is the feedback that you get from your body in space, so when you're moving around. Vestibular is the feedback that you get from your balance. And interoception is your internal body feedback. So it's things like feeling hungry, tired, thirsty, feeling pain and feeling temperature. And if you experience too much or too little of any of those sensations, it can cause you anxiety as your brain thinks that you might be in danger and tries to pay attention to what could be causing you danger. If you know that you're oversensitive or undersensitive to any of these sensations, it can help you to really plan and think about what might be a potential trigger in an environment. So for example, you can choose to shop on a particular day or a particular time of the day where it's quieter and there's less people and less noise. Or you might choose to have your lunch in your workplace in a quieter place rather than in the canteen where there's lots of smells and noise and hustle and bustle. So you can choose to engage in the environments that work best for you and avoid some of the environments that might increase your stress or anxiety. There are also lots of techniques and tools that you can use to try to mitigate some of the impact of sensory processing differences. So for example, some people will wear a baseball cap or tinted glasses, especially when you're outside, to manage the light. Some people will wear headphones to manage the noise. And some people might use a tangle or a fidget or even a hairband to fidget with to try and give themselves that sensory information and to be able to stim to get some more feedback in their body. And those things can help you to really manage some of those sensory processing differences and not let it impact on your anxiety as much on a day-to-day basis. So hopefully you can see those 4 key areas of difference for an autistic person can cause an increase in anxiety if you're in an environment that doesn't particularly meet your needs as a neurodivergent person. A lot of environments traditionally and historically are really, I suppose, designed for neurotypical thinking, and they don't think as much about neurodivergent thinking. And what this means is that you can experience more barriers in your day-to-day life, and that can cause you anxiety. It's not that you're doing it in the wrong way, it's just that actually it's not set up for how you process the world around you. And if you think of an analogy of a phone operating system, if you were to download an Android app onto a phone, an iPhone or an iOS phone, it wouldn't work. Not because the phone is broken or the app is broken, but just actually they're incompatible. You need to make adjustments and tweaks to that app to get it to work for that operating system. And that's similar for autistic or neurodivergent processing. It's not that you're doing it the wrong way, it's just that actually you might need tweaks or changes to the system, the environment or the situation to help you to engage in the way that works best for you. And that can help you to reduce or avoid some of that anxiety. So hopefully you can see that actually for autistic people, they may have more things that are happening to them on a day-to-day basis that increase that baseline level of anxiety or can cause more spikes in anxiety throughout the day. And if you imagine that we all carry a stress bucket around with us, so every person has this bucket, and anything that causes them stress or anxiety goes in that bucket until you process it. Everybody has a bucket, but actually for an autistic person, you might have more things going into the bucket than a neurotypical person. So it's even more important for you to think about actually, how do I rest? How do I promote that self-care? How do I manage those things and really understand what impacts me? And that can help you to alleviate that anxiety, to reduce that anxiety, and on a day-to-day basis be able to manage that better and promote positive well-being and that positive mood. So the second video is going to talk a little bit more about that in detail around how we can promote that positive well-being and mood and how we can really prioritise self-care. Autism NI is here for any support that you might need. So we have a helpline, we have adult resources and adult support. So please do get all the information in the description of the video and you can find out more or contact us for more information. And if you need any further support with your mental health, you can also contact your local GP surgery.